Welcome to Unity. I am Reverend Marla Mason. It's a blessing and a privilege to serve as your minister this morning. I am super duper grateful to be here. I am going to start with today's reading. First off, let me again note that this month's book of the month is The Good Days Start with Gratitude Journal. It's available in our bookstore. There is not a lot of reading in it, so I'm reading from various sources this month. There is an opportunity for you to write in it and create your gratitude journal this month. And I'm encouraging you to do that because our theme this month is Get Grateful. It's all about great gratitude, right? So our source for our reading this morning is The Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes. I'm on page 497. And he says this: pray without ceasing. This means to be always on the affirmative side of life. To pray without ceasing is to doubt never, but to always trust in the law of good. This inner communion is essential to the soul and natural to the mind. It is a constant recognition of our relationship to that presence in which we live and move and have our being. Did you hear that in a prayer this morning? I think you did. We're all quoting from the Bible when we say that. In everything, give thanks. An attitude of gratitude is most salutary and bespeaks the realization that we are now in heaven. How we love to do for those who cooperate with and are grateful for our small endeavors. Gratitude is one of the chief graces of human existence and is crowned in heaven with a consciousness of unity. Today's affirmation, I will read through it once. I will read through it once, and then I'll invite you to join me. The fullness of life is mine. I give thanks for every appearance, every condition in my life, for I walk in the perfect faith, acceptance, and realization that life is good. I live in the vision of an ever greater tomorrow, and know that an ever more grateful heart, and know with an ever more grateful heart that heaven is at hand right now. And so it is. Please stand and join me with conviction. The fullness of life is mine. I give thanks for every appearance, every condition in my life, for I walk in the perfect faith, acceptance, and realization that life is good. I live in the vision of an ever greater tomorrow and know with an ever more grateful heart that heaven is at hand right now. And so it is. Wow. How many of you have a family? You know, we all were raised somewhere by someone, right? You know, we may have had a birth family, we may have had an adopted family, we may have had some kind of family that is really unusual or that we can't really describe very easily or very well, but we all come from somewhere. We come from a family group, if you will. A family is a group of related people or things, that's all. And sometimes we're related by blood, sometimes we're not. But we came from somewhere, didn't we? We were raised somewhere by some group of related things. How many of you have family issues? Like, seriously? You did that? How many of you are perhaps sometimes having a difficult time feeling grateful for your family? And family is a really interesting thing, isn't it? Because I can't think of people on the planet that I love more than I love my family. How about you? I mean, and here's how I know I love them. I keep going back and I keep forgiving them. And they keep forgiving me. And they keep coming back. And isn't that what love is about? Isn't that really what love is about? And our families, I don't know about you, but my family has been a source of some of the greatest blessings of my life, and it's also been the source of some of the most outrageous challenges of my life, yes? It is very interesting, isn't it, how this group of related people has made up so much of the story of my life. And so I want to tell you today a story about a family that begins with the son of the family. This man's name was Joseph. As the story begins, he was about 17 years old. He lived in Canaan, and he came from a blended family. His dad, and somewhere around like his mom, right? And perhaps something in the neighborhood of 3 stepmoms. His dad was Jacob, and his mother was Rachel. And then there was Bilhah and Zilpah and whatever the other one was, who were his stepmoms. And he had a whole bunch of brothers, and he had at least one sister, maybe more. You know, they kind of didn't count girls very well in those days. And Joseph was kind of a shining star. He was the youngest of the boys. His mom, Rachel, was his dad's favorite wife. And he just was one of those people who had the gift of living life full out, and he was his father's favorite. And, you know, he had all these brothers, and they were a little bit jealous, and his father loved him so much that his father had a very expensive coat made for him. An amazing Technicolor dream coat, in fact. And his brothers saw this coat, and they were even more jealous, and there were some other things that went on. Does this happen in your family where stuff goes on and you make up stories and people have feelings? Maybe you're a little jealous. Maybe you're a little angry. Is this familiar to anyone? And so Joseph's brothers decide that they've had enough of this. And initially they think, well, we're just going to kill him. Kind of makes my brother look awesome. And then they decide, well, let's not kill him. Let's just throw him in a well. As if that were any better. Because he's going to starve to death down there. So they throw him in the well. And then they're sitting around and they say, you know, there's a caravan going by. What if we just sold him to the caravan? Then we'd have money. So they sell him to the Midianites. And off he goes. And the Midianites take him to Egypt. And they sell him to a rich Egyptian named Potiphar. And Potiphar puts him to work. He's enslaved. He does whatever it is he does in Potiphar's household. But Potiphar begins to notice Joseph. And he begins to give Joseph more authority and more power in his house. And before you know it, Joseph is the steward of Potiphar's house. And he actually, for someone who is enslaved, he has a lot of power. And he's in charge of money, and he's in charge of all the other staff. And he's created a life for himself in this condition of enslavement that works. And then Potiphar's wife begins to notice Joseph. And she starts coming on to him. And he says, I can't betray my master. I can't betray my God. And she's like really hot for him. And she continues to try to get him engaged in some sort of an illicit affair with her. Until one day, she comes in and she grabs him by the loincloth. And he runs away. I love thinking about this story because I can just see her with the loincloth. Because he runs away. And she's still got the loincloth. And of course, you know, he's running naked through the house, and it's obvious that something has gone on. And she says, oh, yeah, he he tried to be unfaithful with me. And of course, who's going to take the blame, the wife or the slave? Right? So Potiphar is not a happy camper, and Joseph loses everything and goes to jail. And now here he is in jail. Right. It's not very good there, is it? And a few years go by, and Joseph has, the Pharaoh has sent two of his servants to jail that he was not pleased with. The baker and the butler are in jail with Joseph. And both the baker and the butler, they have dreams. And they're like, oh, who's going to interpret our dreams for us? Joseph, interpret our dreams for us. And Joseph says, all interpretation belongs to God. And let me take a stab at it anyway. And so he interprets their dreams, and basically he says, your dreams mean you over here, the butler, the butler. The butler, in 3 days, you will be back in Pharaoh's house serving. Over here, he's looking at the baker, and in 3 days, you will be crucified and dead. And indeed, that is what comes to pass. And the butler goes back to Pharaoh's household, and he's living the good life again, serving Pharaoh. And 2 years go by. And Pharaoh has a dream. Now, keep in mind, Pharaoh is like in charge of all of Egypt. He is like the top power in all of Egypt. And he has a dream. And he says, what does this dream mean? There's nobody to interpret my dream. And the butler says, you know what? There was this guy in jail a couple years ago. And he did a pretty good job with interpreting my dream. He might be able to help you. So Pharaoh calls Joseph out of jail, and Joseph interprets the Pharaoh's dream. And the interpretation is this: for 7 years there will be plenty, and for 7 years there will be famine. You better get ready during the years of plenty for the years of famine. And Pharaoh says, okie doke, you're in charge. And he puts Joseph in charge of all the granaries and all the food wealth. He becomes like the minister of the Department of Agriculture, if you will. And out of every year's harvest, he saves money and grain and seed. And in the 7 years of famine, the people are fed. And Joseph rises up and becomes the second most powerful person in all of Egypt. And his life is looking pretty good. Until the second year of the famine. Now, his brothers and his dad, his group of related people are still living up in Canaan. And the famine has spread to Canaan. And his dad, Joseph's dad, who thinks Joseph is dead, says to the brothers, there's food down in Egypt. Why don't you run down there and get us some food? So the brothers go down to Egypt, and they walk into the disbursement office to ask for food. Joseph recognizes his brothers. His brothers do not recognize Joseph. And Joseph messes with them a little bit. If you want all the details, go read the story. It's actually a really good story. He messes with them a little bit, accuses them of being spies, and says, you have to bring back Benjamin next time you come to prove that you're not spies, because they had mentioned they have a brother, Benjamin, back in Canaan. And so he says, you must bring back Benjamin to prove that you're not spies. And he gives them some food, and he puts all the money back in their saddlebags without their knowing. And they head home, and when they get home, they have the food and the money's in their saddlebags. And they're scared they're going to be accused of thieving. And they say to their dad, food, all money, is good, but next year we got to take Benjamin back to prove we're not spies. And the next year they come back, they take Benjamin. He messes with them again a little bit. Go read the story. He puts a cup in one of the saddlebags and accuses them of stealing it. Don't you feel like you might be tempted to mess with your brothers if they sold you into slavery? But at the same time, Joseph is overcome with emotion and love. And he's hiding that from his brothers and not letting them see that until finally he breaks down in front of them and says, "You don't know me, I'm your brother Joseph." And the brothers are like, "Oh my God, it is." Yikes, we are in like some serious trouble now. And yet he says, they say to him, "You know, we sold you into slavery, blah, 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 blah. How can you give us food, give us money, not be angry with us?" And what does Joseph say? Joseph says, "You meant to harm me, but God means all things for good." Let me say that again. To his brothers who sold him into slavery for 20 years, he's had to go to jail. He's been accused of assaulting his Potiphar's wife. He's been starved. He's been beaten. "You meant to harm me, but God means all things for good." Now, I don't know. If I were Joseph, I might be feeling like I'm going to have a hard time feeling grateful for my family. How about you? But you know, anytime we are looking at these Bible stories, and of course this is a story from the Hebrew Bible, isn't it? It's one of the most important stories in the Hebrew Bible. In fact, Joseph is the great-grandson of Abraham. And Abraham is like the father of it all, right? Anytime we are looking at these stories, it's so critically important to remember that these are our stories. That there is a way that each one of us has been sold into slavery by someone we love. There is a sense in which we found ourselves in jail with the worst of the worst. And jail in those days could not have been good, you guys. It's not like prison now, which is not good, right? But imagine what prison was like 4,000 years ago. That somehow we have ended up in prisons of consciousness or prisons in the world. That each of us has found ourselves bubbling up again to create a life that works. And each of us has been shot down again. Anybody? Each of us has had times of thriving, and each of us has had times of darkness in our lives. And yet what can we learn from the story of Joseph about how we want to walk through the darkness in our lives? And I particularly love this story because it's all about family. And we got a lot of stuff about family, yeah? We've all been thrown in the well by someone we love, haven't we? We've all had our moments where we felt betrayed. We've all had our moments where we felt angry or like we needed to get back at someone for something that happened, and particularly sometimes by those that we love the most. But what did Joseph say? All interpretation belongs to God. And it's interesting to me because when I first read this story many years ago, when I first really studied it, I didn't understand that, because what he says, both times, he said that to Pharaoh too, all interpretation belongs to God. But here, let me take a stab at it anyway. But you know what I began to realize is he's saying all interpretation belongs to God, and here, let me put on the mind of God for a moment. How beautiful is that? All interpretation belongs to God, and I can borrow the mind of God, put that on, and interpret things rightly, because I am created of God's stuff. I am part of the infinite one. God's mind is my mind when I get conscious and choose to align with its wisdom, with its grace, with its power. And then I interpret rightly, as God would interpret. Because I don't know about you, but I've felt betrayed at times, and the interpretation I put on, wow, she really hates me. I think I'll hate her back. Let me gossip. Let me tell stories. Let me say bad things about another child of the infinite. But we get tempted into that when we interpret according to the standards of the world. We get tempted into judgment, into shaming, into blaming, into making people wrong. Is it just me? Am I the only one? No. But if we can stop, breathe deeply, remind ourselves all interpretation belongs to God. Now, let me take a stab at it. From the mind of God, from the mind of love, from the mind of peace, from the mind of grace, from the mind of wisdom. Let me interpret as God would interpret. As best we can, yes? I can guarantee you it always starts with love. You see, our families and all the drama and all the stuff that we get in our families are just being who they have to be. In order for us to be able to feed all of Egypt for 7 years. Where would Egypt have been if Joseph's brothers had not thrown him into a well? Where would Egypt have been during the famine if his brothers had not sold him to the Midianites? He fed Egypt for 7 years. He ran the whole bus. He made life good for many, many people, only because his brothers sold him to the Midianites. Isn't that a powerful thought? See, we have to raise ourselves. And every single time he fell, he raised himself. He got sold into slavery. He raised himself to the top of Potiphar's household. He got thrown into jail. He raised himself until he was running the jail. He got into Pharaoh's household. He raised himself second only to the highest. And isn't that an interesting symbolism? Second only to the highest. Huh? We are second only to the highest God, the infinite mind. Our minds are but tiny segments of that mind, but we can borrow the mind of God. We can see things rightly. We can get grateful for where we come from, for all of our experience, because it allows us to feed all of Egypt. It allows us to be about our purpose here on planet Earth. So we got to get grateful for family, the good, the bad, the ugly, right? All parts. Knowing that everything that has happened to us, do you hear that? To us. It doesn't happen to us. It happens. It simply happens. And we get to choose, more or less, how we are going to be with it, and remember that all interpretation belongs to God. All interpretation belongs to love. All interpretation becomes to grace. All interpretation belongs to God the good, God the infinite. Now, do you have something in your mind that you're kind of like, I don't know, maybe, but maybe not that? Some experience, some past. I don't know. I guess I need to say this. It kind of keeps coming up. I was in a thing like 25 years ago. Who knows who Edwene Gaines is? I was at a thing. She's an amazing prosperity teacher. And I was at a thing that she did like 25 years ago. And she said something that changed my life. She stood in front of a group of about 600 people maybe. And she said, and she said it with her little southern accent, but I wish I could talk like that because it was absolutely adorable. She said, I was severely abused as a child. I was sexually abused. I was physically abused. I was emotionally and mentally abused. She said, I could tell you stories that would curl your toes about the things that happened to me as a child. And she said, I am so grateful for that experience because I am a woman of power. And I needed that induction into the misuse of power so that I would not misuse my power. And I went, whoa. Do you see, she moved into a place of gratitude for all of her experience of life. She was sold to the Midianites, was she not? And yet, she was able to move into a godly interpretation of her experience of life and recognize and understand that that was a gift that was given her so that she could be a more rightly powerful woman in the world and live as God would have her live. Can we embrace all of our life experience with that same measure of grace, with that same measure of awareness that everything that is unfolding for us has a purpose and all interpretation belongs to God? So let's practice a little bit. I invite you to breathe. Were you holding your breath? I was. And as you breathe, just become more open, more awake, more receptive, more anchored in the awareness of the infinite presence of the infinite life. The living one is beating your heart, breathing you. You cannot be separate from that which created you. And as you breathe into this awareness, you open your heart more fully than you ever have before to that presence and to the awareness of that presence as perfect love, perfect grace, infinite support, deep and powerful wisdom. And you simply open your mind, you open your heart, and become receptive to this love, to this grace, to this power, to this wisdom. And perhaps now you bring to mind something in your family for which you are not so grateful, for which it is difficult for you to align with the grace of God. It might be an experience or a person, something for which the gratitude well is dry. And as you bring this to mind, simply breathe. Breathe into the awareness that all interpretation belongs to God. Breathe into the awareness that infinite love is right where you are, that you are supported, that you are lifted, that you are inspired to greater heights of glory. As you allow yourself to put on the mind of God, to borrow the mind of God, and begin to see this person or this incident, God, with the eyes of love, with the eyes of wisdom, and with the eyes of grace. And you begin to realize that in this experience is some gift for which you can be grateful. And this gift that allows you to feed the Egyptians for 7 years, simply makes itself known to you now, small or large. What is it this experience or this person has given you? And you begin to feel your heart swell with gratitude as everything falls into place. And you relax, you surrender, you breathe, you allow. You allow yourself to see with the eyes of the infinite. For God means all things for good. And now give thanks for the wisdom, for the gift, for the spiritual community that supports you as you deepen and explore in God. Give thanks. Give thanks for the opening and the opportunity to leave this place today and feed all of Egypt. And commit in your heart right now to move forth with grace and power into this new awareness, and to be and do all that God would have you be, all that God would have you do. And see yourself walking in the happy expectancy of good. For God is good, and all is well. And so I close this message with a grateful heart and simply allow it to be, to enliven and to grow us all. And so it is. Amen.